have you introduce Fly to us.
Great. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. I was a law student just over 10 years ago at Stanford. My dream was to be a prosecuting attorney, to help put people in jail to make the world a safer place. And I volunteered in juvenile hall, and I met 15 and 16 and 17-year-old boys who are looking at 10, 20, and some life in prison. And over, their statements to me would start with, if only. If only someone had cared about me. If only I had known how serious the consequences were. If only I had been given a chance, I wouldn't be here. And their faces and their voices began to haunt me. And I decided I needed to do something different. I needed to help. So I put them in groups and said, can someone like me prevent other kids from ending up where you are? And they said yes. Go teach kids about the law to help them understand the consequences. We do that at Fly. Give kids role models when they don't have one to help show them how to live different lives. We do that at Fly. Give kids a chance to give back to their communities, because once they mess up, they're written off by society as just being delinquents. And we do that at Fly. They wrote my letters of recommendation about 10 years ago, and with an initial grant from Soros, $32,500, we started Fly. And now 10 years later, we have an annual budget of about $2 million a year, 26 staff, 100 volunteers, and we work with 1,000 kids on probation in Santa Clara and San Mateo counties, as well as 2,000 at-risk middle school kids, to really help them transform their lives, get back on track with school, get back on track with life. And we do it for less than 1/10 of the cost of incarceration. Because of the work that we've done, we've not only received a lot of accolades locally, but we've now become a part of the system reform process for juvenile justice in Santa Clara and San Mateo counties. And recently we were inducted as an Ashoka Fellow and joined the social entrepreneurs with recognition that what we're doing is repeatable, it's scalable, and it's important to a national issue of crime and delinquency.
Thank you, Christa.
Hi, I'm Janet Knipe, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Foster Youth Action Network, and I'm also very happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me and convening this wonderful panel. And I'm wondering how many people in this room have a personal connection to the foster care system. Does anybody have a personal connection to the foster care system? How many of you know that foster youth have twice the incidence of post-traumatic stress syndrome as veterans of the Iraq War? Wow. Does anybody know? Oh.
We know now.
You're no different, really, than policymakers all around the country and the general public. That's the reason that the National Foster Youth Action Network exists. This is an invisible population, foster youth are. We feel that it is essential that foster youth talk directly to policymakers who shape their lives. In order to do that, we need to train them to be advocates and leaders in their own communities and to have the esteem and the confidence to be able to carry on those conversations with policymakers. The Action Network then is an organization that helps young people in the foster care system, young adults, and teenagers to transform themselves into leaders and advocates for change in their communities. We are active in 5 states outside of California: Oregon, Indiana, Virginia, Mississippi, and soon to be Nebraska. Groups of foster youth there in each of those states are following a model that was developed here in California of getting training and coaching from us that empowers them to bring voice to their experiences in the foster care system, usually for the first time, to think beyond those experiences in care to a policy level, and to be able to engage with policymakers and make direct and specific policy recommendations about how their lives and the lives of others can be improved. So the work of the Action Network is a peer-to-peer training model of empowerment and youth leadership. It is being replicated all around the country now, and groups of foster youth everywhere are gaining the skills and the confidence to raise and bring voice to their experience and to shape policy.
I'm Marlene Bjornsrud, and I am with the Bay Area Women's Sports Initiative, commonly known as BOSSY. 6 years ago exactly, a group of women athletes and women sports advocates sat in my living room, starting out with a question of saying, what if we? And then going into the idea of if we could mobilize the women's sports community in the Bay Area to make a significant difference in our community, what would that be? And that night, we determined that the first thing we would do is in believing that sports is one of the greatest laboratories for teaching leadership, that we would create a platform for women athletes to use those gifts that they have, their understanding of the importance of physical activity, their understanding of setting goals and of learning life skills, that we would create a platform for them to move into the community in the lives of little girls who live in poverty. And that program now is known as Bossy Girls. It's led each semester by over 150 women athletes from Stanford, Santa Clara, San Jose State, community colleges, anywhere who give their time weekly to be on a playground using physical activity as a tool to teach life lessons and life skills for little girls. In March, we will enroll our 10,000th Bossy Girl, which is a significant milestone that we'll be celebrating. Stemming from that program, then, the idea of athletes who could use physical activity as well in the lives of the moms and the women in the community who surround the little girls. That program is now led by a Latina athlete from U.S. Track and Field, and she speaks Spanish and English and has now around 300 to 350 women each week involved in physical activity, nutrition lessons, and also learning life skills. And then the third program, a beautiful Paralympian, the top wheelchair tennis player in the nation, came to us and said, what about kids who look like me? And so we began what we call Bossy Rollers. And Rollers is for kids with physical disabilities, but just recently has expanded to kids who need to learn to roll with whatever life brings them. So we now have a program for kids with cognitive disabilities, Down syndrome, a number of conditions, and we're launching a program for kids who are deaf, who will also be led by a deaf soccer player from San Jose State. So that's who we are. That's what it means to be bossy.
That's great. And all of this is what it means to be an SBA grantee. Aren't they incredible? I think for partners, it's so amazing to look at you three and just see, what we've invested in, what amazing work they're doing. So, pause. All right, now let's do questions. The first question I have for you guys, and let's start with Marlene and go this way. Tell us about what's the greatest challenge that you face with your population of at-risk youth that you are working with.
And I saw in big bold letters you said you'll stop us after 2 minutes. So I'm anxious to see how you're going to do that. Spelled the other way, though. I would say the greatest challenge that we've really had to learn is what poverty does, in particular, to the life of a little girl, which we've learned is very different than how it impacts a boy. I think we've also learned that our entry into the world of Title I elementary schools is physical activity, but the challenges are way beyond anything that physical activity is going to do. So we believe that our biggest challenge is that we need to listen, we need to be all ears, we need to be all eyes, and not feel like we have the answer, but that we're part of the solution to making their lives different and making their lives better. I'm going to stop there because you're going to throw something.
Perfect.
I would say my greatest challenge is getting the general public, people like you all, to understand who foster youth are. Just as I said in my opening remarks, so little is known about them. They are an invisible population. They come into care through no fault of their own, and I believe that when they do that, all of us have a responsibility to them as parents. Their lives become very chaotic at that time, and we don't have good outcomes, just the one statistic that I shared with you early on points that out. So I feel so strongly that the grim outcomes that we have from young people coming out of the foster care system are a result of poor policies and not bad kids. And that all of us can play a role, as any parent would, to try to help those young people succeed. They have the same hopes and dreams as our own children. They need to have the same opportunities as our own children. So the work of the Action Network, in part, is educating everybody about a population of young people who fade away, who we don't know, who we don't understand, and for all of us to understand that there is a way that we can connect with them and to support them. Just to give you an example of our work and how struck people are by the youth that we're working with. Just last weekend we were training in Oregon. We did a 2-day training with a group of foster youth there who then went to their capital and met with 20 different legislators. The president of the Oregon Senate came to them at the end of the day and said, "This is the best thing that has happened to Oregon foster youth in a long time. I have learned so much from you." That's why it is so important that everybody gets to hear from foster youth, and that's my biggest challenge.
Our biggest challenge at FLY is raising the resources that we need to meet the demand. Every single program at FLY has waiting lists. Neighboring Bay Area communities are asking us to come. But government dollars to do work with criminal justice youth are incredibly limited. And similar to the challenge I think that Janet is facing, while our population might be visible, the visible part is not good. And the public perception as to who these kids are is that they're super predators, they're horrible kids. I've been doing this work for 13 years as volunteer, as staff member, and I've yet to find a kid that was born bad. These kids have made poor choices, absolutely, but the full context as to who they are explains what those choices are, and getting that information out to the public and attracting people who are willing to look past the behavior that brought a kid to the system and understand who they are as a human being is a great challenge. The research, though, shows that for kids that are incarcerated, over 90% report they grow up feeling they do not have access to even one positive adult role model. Over 80% of them say they do not know how to solve problems without violence or crime. And this is because they're growing up in homes and communities where their cousins, their aunts, their uncles, their parents, even their grandparents are in and out of jail, making it seem like a rite of passage. Over 80% of them are suffering from severe mental illness issues and trauma because of what they've experienced in their homes. Most FLY kids, when they come to us, when we ask, "Hey, where do you see yourself when you're 18 or 21?" their answer is, "I'll be in prison or dead." That's what they think the world has to offer them. And this is a significant problem. There's 13,000 kids arrested in Santa Clara and San Mateo County each year. Right this moment, we have 6,000 kids on probation in those two counties. And for every kid that gets incarcerated, we spend $283 a night per kid. We're investing $100,000 per year investing in their failure when we incarcerate them. And yet at FLY, our most expensive program is less than $8,000 a year. And we see that during that program year, over 80% of our kids do not go back in the system for a new crime or even a violation. And we know the system, once kids get caught up in the criminal justice system, 50 to 80% of them are just going to keep cycling back and forth. We're successful because we have a model that works. And the challenge is reaching the hearts and minds of investors to get them to come and care to learn more about these kids and see past what we hear in the media and invest in their success and in releasing their strengths as opposed to investing in their failure.
Holly, is it okay to ask a follow-up question
Sure.
now, or should I wait? So, Christa, what is the actual age range of the kids in your program?
So it varies. Our sweet spot, the place that we target and we work the hardest with probation officers to get referrals, is 15 to 17.
Okay.
But you have kids in the juvenile justice system as young as 10, 11, 12, up to 18. And there's a fine line. So a young person might be, for example, in the foster care system, they get in a fight at a group home and now they're sent over into our system. So it very quickly, they can shift from
right.
one organization to the other.
And if you have not successfully intervened by the age of 17 or so, what happens after that? Is there any realistic prospect of successful intervention later?
There can be, but it's a huge void. There aren't a lot of services that are targeted at young adults. And one of the interesting challenges in juvenile justice is if a kid hits what they call 17 years and 4 months, they are automatically banned from a number of different programs because they're going to, quote, age out. our board made a significant decision that we're not going to do that. So we will take 17-year-olds knowing that we're going to now probably work with them until they're 18 or 19 to help with them with that transition into adulthood. But it's a definite area where there are some serious resources that are lacking.
Okay, so part of the reason for my question, I remember at your site visit, there was a juvenile court judge there, I don't remember his name, and I asked him if they get into their mid-late 20s without being helped, are there any realistic prospects for helping them then? And he said no.
Yeah, there's not a lot.
Is that because they're simply too sad, or is it because of a lack of resources?
No, they're not, because the brain research shows there's the prefrontal cortex in our brains is the last part of the brain to develop. And that's the part of the brain that controls our impulsivity, our understanding of consequences, and our decision making. That part of the brain doesn't fully form until your 20s.
Okay.
So from a pure scientific perspective, it is not too late to have an impact on how somebody thinks, acts, and behaves. And what we're going to see, especially with the cuts that are happening at the government and state level, the amount of resources to do that work is very limited. And the quick fix that often people see is we'll lock them up. It scares us, it's intimidating, but all the research shows that it's just not working. I mean, if 80% of the cars coming off of a GM plant were defective, we would shut the plant down. But we haven't done that with our prison system.
Okay, thanks, Holly, for letting me add to that.
Okay, so our next question is, if you could tell us, and let's start with Janet this time.
Sure.
If you could tell us, I know there are many keys to your work, but if you could just narrow down one of your biggest keys that has helped empower these at-risk youth that you're working with.
I think one of the keys, I'm actually going to talk about two, but they're tied together.
Okay.
For us, giving young people who are in the foster care system or recently out of the foster care system control over something is incredibly powerful. These are young people who have come into the foster care system, had multiple placements, multiple social workers, adults in and out of their lives, changed schools, changed teachers, friends, communities. They don't trust, typically, adults. So creating an environment for them where they can actually control their own group, create an organization from the ground up, pick the advocacy issues that they're most passionate about and develop an advocacy agenda and really take charge of something is incredibly powerful. Because of the chaotic experiences that they have had in foster care, so many of them want to make things better in the foster care system, usually for their brothers and sisters that are coming up in the foster care system after them. They want to give back, they want to make a difference. This is an opportunity for them to channel that positive energy into a way that really gives back, makes a difference in not only their lives, but in the lives of others. The creation of these groups and having them be youth-led serves a dual purpose. One, it allows young people to have direct access to policymakers, so there's tremendous policy benefits. Secondly, there are key developmental assets that these young people learn as a result of their participation. That helps them as they transition to care. The other key that's so central to this is that it is a peer-to-peer training model. The trainers that I have also all grew up in foster care. So they're in their 20s now, and they're role models, they're fabulous facilitators, and you have young people all around the country who now are looking up to them and saying, I can be that person too. So it's helping them personally, it's helping them politically, it's helping their brothers and sisters. So the key to us is giving young people control, teaching them how to do that, and getting the adults out of the way.
Marlene?
Well, as I sit and listen to Christa in particular, I get this huge sense of pride because Christa is a college women's basketball player who chose to use everything she learned. And I know because we've talked that every day she draws on some of those lessons that she learned from those years of hard work up and down the court. I just think what we've probably all talked about is role models. As I see what happens in particular in the life of a little girl, in the life of a child with disabilities. When someone comes into their life who looks like them, then they can say, if I can see her, I can be her. And, you know, in the sports world, it's almost impossible to see women athletes competing on TV. And if you do a little research and you skim through with your remote, right now you'll find some women's basketball, but you have to hunt for it. Once in a while you'll find some women's tennis, a little bit of women's golf. But a little boy can turn on the TV and see a strong, powerful, athletic male role model any time of day. ESPN now broadcasts men's paintball championships where they shoot each other with paintballs. And that's great. If that sells, that's fine. But I just worry about the little girls who don't have that same opportunity. So their sense of not having a voice, not having a place on the playground, not having anyone believe in them, encourage them to be physically active, those things are very much gone. There's very little PE left, especially in high poverty areas. Everything has come down to academic intervention, which I believe is so important. But if you want to talk about the brain, the prefrontal cortex, how exercise stimulates that and helps kids make healthy choices, helps them to learn, help them to grow, that's gone out of high poverty schools. So I just think that the magic that happens when the athletes arrive on a campus is incredible, and it has nothing to do with who that athlete is or how successful they are, because Brandy Chastain, who is one of our founders and is one of the more recognizable women athletes in the world since the '99 World Cup, can walk on a campus at the same time as the judo athletes from San Jose State, and I bet you didn't even know they had a team, women's judo. Those girls will flock to those judo athletes and leave Brandy in the dust. It doesn't matter. It's all about authentic, very real relationships, and that's where I think that is the secret to empowerment for us. And it continues to be about, if I can see her, I can be her, and to have thousands of little girls have that opportunity in their lives every week is amazingly significant to me.
If you asked our clients, they would say Fly cares, and they care about us when everybody else has given up. But what's behind that caring that is the most important part for us about empowerment is that we care in a way that's repeatable. We care in a way that's strategic, that's based in best practices, in brain research, in change management, and motivational enhancement therapy, so we can train our role models and volunteers how to care in a way that's going to make a long-term and sustainable difference. Recently, it's been great. We formed a partnership with the Thrive Foundation, and we're one of a handful of organizations that's working in the United States to take the best practice research in brain development and adolescent development and put it into practice. And at Fly, what we figured out about empowerment is we have to take a young person from not even owning that they have a problem to owning it, to believing and wanting to change their life circumstances, to then believe that they have the skills to do it, and then have this sustainable support to make it happen. And so what we've done very strategically with how we lay out our programs and our services is to move a young person through that change management cycle. And I think for any of us, if we take a moment and we think about change, change is hard. Think about the hands-free law and how much that wreaked havoc on our lives, right? And that's a small change. Now imagine if I come to you and I say, you need to change who you hang out with, you need to change what you want to be when you grow up, you need to change what you do every day after school, you need to change how you think, how you feel, which is essentially what the juvenile justice system is doing. It overwhelms a young person and they shut off and they disengage from society, which costs us as taxpayers a whole lot of money. We figured out the way to engage them and to give them the confidence and the skills and the ability to really make that change happen. The key part of that also is having the confidence that despite the circumstances that our young people are in, change is possible. There's great research on what's called adolescent development. And the way that I like to think about it is like this. If a young person is like a glass ball, if we drop the ball on the ground, it's going to shatter. But if we encase that ball with rubber band after rubber band after rubber band, it's going to be dropped. There are going to be obstacles, situations that we wish we could just yank them out of that they wouldn't have to experience. But now when it's dropped, the ball won't shatter, it will bounce back. So at Fly, we strategically look at a young person and say, what are the rubber bands you need to be successful? Is it a role model? Is it a constructive way to use your time? Is it a sense that you know how to solve problems on your own? Let's put rubber band after rubber band after rubber band, so when you hit that ground, you can bounce back.
So my last question, and then it's open to all of you, is what is the most important thing that we in the room, or any donor or volunteer or average person who cares, can do to help the at-risk youth that you're working with? Let's start with Christa.
The most important thing you could do for our kids is to care about them, to talk about them, and to get other people to care about them and be willing to learn about this issue. These are kids that when I talk to folks about what we do, there is a large segment of the population that will say they're not worth the effort, they can't be reached, they can't be saved, forget about it. And that has to change because these are kids. I'll give you an example. James, like a client, many of the clients we have. James was born into a family. His father was a gang member. His mother was a drug dealer. As a toddler, he saw his mother cooking drugs in the kitchen. His job as a toddler was to open the door for his quote-unquote uncles who would come in and buy drugs. His home was a crack house, so every morning he'd wake up, 10 to 15 people would be sleeping on the floor. His older brothers were a part of the business, so they would hide their guns underneath James's mattress. So by the time he was a preteen, he was selling drugs because that's what you did in his family. By the time he was 16, he was only going to school to sell drugs and to make money. In and out of the system, incarcerated, locked up for fighting for drugs, James says he got lucky because he got referred and sent to Fly. So let's fast forward 2 years later. James is now 18. He's graduated off probation. Hasn't been in trouble in 2 years. That's the longest since the 7th grade. With his case manager, he set a goal of not only getting back into high school where he wasn't going for years, but he needed to earn 62 credits to graduate, which he did in 6 months. Graduated high school, got his driver's license, got a green card, got a job, and is now working at a community college. Now, this is a young man that if we hadn't intervened, more than likely he would have ended up incarcerated, where we would have invested $100,000 a year in his failure, as opposed to investing in releasing his strengths. But in the wider social public, when we talk about young men and women like James, people would write him off and say he isn't worth the effort. And so for us at Fly, the most important factor crucial to our success and what we need for donors and volunteers is to learn about our clients, to understand the problem, and be willing to talk about it, and introduce folks to us, to our clients, to the organization that want to learn more and care about this population of young people. It is not a population that is top of mind for many foundations, for many family foundations, or many donors. It isn't. And that is a challenge that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So I would encourage folks, visit our website. We have a great film that shows you about our clients. Think about it the next time you hear things come up about talking about juvenile justice kids, because as our kids would say, we need to flip the script. We need to give and put out a different perception about who these clients are and the amazing and beautiful potential that they have when we unleash their strengths.
I would agree with Christa. I think for any of you, your friends, your colleagues, I think helping us to increase visibility of who young people in the foster care system are would be a tremendous help. Not long ago, I was having a conversation with a man who was retiring from the banking industry in San Francisco, looking to do some volunteer work. We were having a conversation about foster youth, and he said, you know, there's so many competing and important populations out there. I have no personal connection to the foster care system. I get my information from the media. Until I had this conversation with you, I would look at the news, read the newspaper, listen to the radio, and I had to block out stories about a lot of different groups because I can't care about them all. And until I had this conversation with you, my understanding of foster youth was, or as I heard these stories, they're either juvenile delinquents, and therefore I don't need to care about them because they're bad kids. And I know you've heard that. Or when I would hear stories about foster youth, I'd think they're all going to be adopted, therefore I don't need to care about them either. I never understood that there was a population of young people in the middle that were neither juvenile delinquents or going to be adopted, that needed services, that needed to be understood and had their own unique challenges. So as I think about sort of spreading the word to volunteers, to donors, to folks like you, I think people really getting a sense of who these young people are is essential. For all of us to ask ourselves, if something happened in our family and no one could take care of my child, my nephew, my niece, would I feel, nobody in my biological family or my close friends, would I feel comfortable with my child, my niece, my nephew going into our nation's foster care system? Until that answer is yes, we have work to do. These are young people who want an opportunity to succeed, to break the cycle, to have the kinds of lives we want for all of our children. And they are trying very hard to get there against incredible odds. We change policies, we change lives. We get them engaged in programs like this. There are such intrinsic benefits. It saves us all dollars, but it builds community for them in a way that they have never had. So increasing visibility, helping us as a national organization to reach our board development goals, or helping to develop a fund development strategy that engages national funders and brings attention again to a population that so many overlook. They don't have many champions. We need you to be their champions.
There's no doubt money and time is what happens in the nonprofit world. You need both. But I think as I listen to Janet and Christa, it takes me back to a story Brandy Chastain talks about of her experience on the playground one day. And before I tell the story, I need to refresh your memory of who Brandy Chastain is. In the '99 Women's World Cup, the most watched women's sports event in the history of the world, and maybe will forever hold that place. But at the end of double overtime, they went to penalty kicks in the Rose Bowl with President Clinton and the first family there, 90,000 plus, standing room only. And it just happened that day that the final kick came to Brandy. If she made it, the United States would win the World Cup Championship of '99. If she missed it, they would have gone on to penalty kicks, and who knows what would have happened. But at that moment, she did make the kick. And in the moment of jubilation, she did something that she had done and that women's players had done millions of times, just nobody had watched, nobody had seen. But she, what? Ripped off her jersey. Just like the guys all do, just like the invisible women do. She ripped it off in what she calls a moment of insanity. And no, it wasn't a ploy by Nike to sell more of their sports bras, because Brandy shouldn't have even been the one taking that kick. But Brandy has forever been known as this woman who celebrates. And that picture, it's the first time in history that an athlete has been featured on the cover of Sports Illustrated, Newsweek, and People all the same week. So it was a significant watershed moment for all of women in sport. No matter what you've ever played, that was a moment to remember. So Brandy is known for celebrating. Well, then put that same Brandy on the elementary school campus of Washington Elementary in the Washington, Guadalupe area of San Jose, the poorest community in Santa Clara County. Kids have nothing. And we had more than 100 little girls, bossy girls in the playground, all in their little bossy girl shirts. And Brandy felt like the day was kind of going a little slow. The energy level wasn't very good. So she gathered all the girls in a giant circle, which is very much like herding cats, but she was able to do it, stood in the middle and said, "Okay, Who wants to come to the middle of the circle and show us your greatest celebration? And one little girl immediately raises her hand, runs to the middle of the circle, and Brandy says, okay, what are you going to do? And she froze. Literally just froze. And Brandy said, I'm standing there going, now what do I do? There's 100 girls waiting. So she said, okay, how about if I show you mine? And then you do it. So Brandy pulls off this goofy, weird thing, and kept her shirt on, but, kind of yay. And all the girls, 100 girls going, yeah, cool. So she looks at the little girl again and said, okay, are you ready? But nothing. Froze again. So Brandy just kind of got down eye to eye and just said, you know what? You can do this. I know you can do it. It doesn't matter what you do, but I'm with you and I know you can do it. And she said in seconds, this little girl busts off this Mary Lou Retton backflip, just went crazy, and the place went wild. 100 little girls pounding each other on the back, high-fiving, and then went back to normal, went back to Bossy Girls. As Brandy left that day, she's leaving, and a little girl, she feels somebody pulling on her sweatshirt, and she looks down, and here's this little girl. And the little girl looks up at her and says, thank you for not giving up on me. In very broken English. And she spoke almost no English, but she knew enough to say, thank you for not giving up on me. Well, to me, that's exactly what this is about. It's about saying for you all and for our community as a whole and for our government and for everybody else that there are kids who are invisible. And the great majority of people don't care. And the great majority has given up. On the kids in flight, on the great kids in foster care, on these beautiful thousands of little girls on playgrounds that you can drive by and you have no idea what's going on in their lives. So to me, that's kind of the umbrella that says, don't give up. Just simply don't give up. And if that tugs on your heart, it means you have to do something. Whatever it is, it almost doesn't matter, but you have to do something. So, thank you.
Question. Can we just go home now? All right, now we're lucky enough to get to ask whatever questions we want of these amazing leaders.
Janet, my mom came to be aware of a situation in Utah where a number of, in this case it was young women, girls, were coming out of foster care society, situation, but because they were 18, the government check stopped, and so the people that were their foster parents just went, get out, and the kind of people that would do that probably had not necessarily spent a lot of time preparing these people for that. So this group of girls was able to move into kind of a residential care, and then people started mentoring them. But is that fairly common in the foster care?
Yes, it's very common. It was until very recently here in California, all young people would exit the foster care system at age 18. Mm-hmm. Now, think about your own children, young adults, again, friends, family, members. Could they make it on their own, become completely self-sufficient at age 18 in today's world, in the Bay Area or anywhere in California or in this country? Could they do that? Think of all the chaos that young people in the foster care system have had. Difficult, troubled childhood, families struggling, being removed from that chaotic life to something else entirely, perhaps living with strangers, being moved so many times. So you have all of that inconsistency, all that chaos, and then you're expecting young people to become self-sufficient at age 18. The research shows that the average age of stability, anybody know what it is? And stability in this sense is you're not couch surfing anymore, and you're not having your parents do your laundry and contribute to
Is
your
it different for girls and boys?
food budget.
25?
Is it 24?
26. Now that research was done many, many years ago, long before the boomerang generation long before this current recession. When the research is done on this period of time, who knows what it will be. It will be much higher than that. So we're expecting young people who've had tremendous chaos in their lives, no consistent adults, to exit the foster care system at age 18 and become self-sufficient. This is one of those failed policies that if the general public knew that and thought about it in relation to their own family, wouldn't you be outraged and say, we can't do that anymore? It has been a tremendous personal cost to these young people, a tremendous community cost to all of us. That's part of the reason why we have such poor outcomes for young people as they're exiting the foster care system, and we all pay a price for that. So yes, Utah, you still exit at age 18. California and some other states now, it's 21. Only 21.
Yeah.
So we're heading in the right direction.
When they exit, what are their options?
Well, some stay with foster families. So there are a number of foster families who don't care about that, and they're wonderful in their devotion to these young people. If that doesn't happen, the majority of the adult homeless population has a history in foster care. So many of them end up at least part of the time on the street. That costs all of us tremendous toll on them emotionally. There is, and now again around the country, but also here in California, a number of what's called transitional housing programs, which means that they can have sort of a bridge between being in foster care placement and being sort of on their own, where they have more independence, but still some services. Many, 70% of young people want to go on to college. They can't do it. One of the biggest reasons they can't go on to college, the best step for them is community college, and there's no housing there. There's no place for them to live. There are programs now throughout California, also some around the country, but more in California, that help young people when they get to college, because they have no place to stay when the dorms close at Thanksgiving. They have no home, they have no family, they have no safety net. So that period from 18 to, let's say, 26 is one of the most difficult times for young people coming out of the foster care system.
Before I get to my question, I just want to commend the three of you. Just so inspiring, and you're all doing wonderful work, so thanks for being here. Chris, I had a question for you. First, though, I think as a funder, it's so wonderful to hear, you're so emotionally attached to the outcomes and taking these kids from, juvenile delinquency to a thriving citizen. That sometimes the metrics and how you get there are forgotten, but I find that I just want to commend you for including that, because I think that's so important to the change management system and the research and all those things you're basing your work on. I think is fabulous. So to the question, it seems like you do have some numbers around how much it costs to do this versus what we as a society pay. And it seems like with our budget situation, it seems like the time is so right and relevant to sort of bump that up at sort of a state level or even national level and try to create some visibility around this. And what are your thoughts? And
I think that's absolutely right, and that's really interesting. And as becoming an expert on this, there's some interesting work that's been done in England around what are called social bonds, where and incentivizing investors to provide some upfront investment to show if we reduce recidivism, we can reduce your reliance on the prison system, and therefore the government can divert resources from the prison system out into the community. So I'm hopeful that this crisis that we're in lies a great opportunity to have the dialogue in a different way. But I'm also mindful that I think at times there will be quite a bit of shouting, and how do we set ourselves up to have a constructive dialogue about some of these issues will be key.
Along those same lines, can you give us an update about what's going on with the juvenile ranch?
The ranch facility that probation has done. So to give you some context, So Santa Clara has what's called a ranch facility, which is a place where young people are sent if they're going to be doing a commitment of, say, 8 months or more. There was a model called the Missouri model that really looked at how do you make this system much more rehabilitative. So in the juvenile justice system, the tension is it's a system that's supposed to be both punitive and rehabilitative. And what's very interesting is watching how different departments walk that line and how that transpires. So they have gone through a massive overhaul of the ranch facility to try to make it a much more rehabilitative program. The good news is they're making some steps in the right direction. They still have quite a ways to go. It also now creates there's waiting lists for kids to get into the ranch facility, which they are working on. Part of what they are now looking at the ranch facility is there are situations where we call placements, where we will send young people out of state to go be rehabilitated. And so now they're looking at, can we bring those kids back and then put them into this ranch program now that we see that this might be working in a more effective way. So that is something that they're looking at and working on. From the community perspective, one of the big tensions from the nonprofit perspective is folks will say, the research shows the least restrictive alternatives for a young person is much better for their long-term prognosis. So as opposed to sending them to a ranch facility, no matter how fantastic and therapeutic it might be, the best place for them to be rehabilitated is in the community with extensive wraparound services. And this is where we get into tension with the prison guard union, correct? Right? And how that works. So one of the concerns that the nonprofit community has is that there are resources not being utilized that are localized that would keep kids out of confinement that need to be utilized to a greater extent. So it's one of those tensions where we want to commend the system for moving in the right direction, but we also don't want to be reliant on incarcerating our young people to get the best possible services. We don't want to graduate them up into incarceration to give them the help that they need. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I'm some background. I'm chair of Kids in Common.
Yep.
And Dana Bunnett
Yep.
spent a lot of time on
Yeah.
juvenile justice issues
Yep.
and trying to get people from sending, raising the age at which kids will actually go to juvenile hall or go to the ranch, because they were sending 10, 11
That's right.
year olds
Well,
there.
and-
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I just saw her yesterday. And it's interesting because our new Board of Supervisor in Santa Clara County, Dave Cortese, has announced that this is the year of the child and really put a challenge to our system to not incarcerate people, to not incarcerate kids under the age of 16. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays itself out. The next year or two are going to be fascinating in the juvenile justice system. There's a lot happening.
Christa, following on, prison guard discussion, it seems to me, a number of private industries have faced similar issues over the years. I can think of the airlines 7 or 8 years ago who basically had to downsize 30% to survive. I'm sure there are others. Are there any, lessons or findings from what's happened in the private sector that, might help with what you're dealing with?
I think that's a good question, and I think we're going to have to find out the answer. We're going to be forced to look at those answers very quickly here, because when the county, for example, Santa Clara County is looking at the number changes. This week it's about $250 million deficit. Right. The only way they're going to deal with that deficit is by reduction of county staff members. So I think this is going to be a time where a lot of that is going to be looked at, and I think that challenge is that there's a lot of fantastic people in the system. I mean, there are a lot of really well-intentioned, good probation officers who do good work. And so it's one of the things at Fly that we really try to be mindful of, is that the solution, there isn't a magic bullet that's going to fix this problem. And we don't see that there's a demon, right? That it's very easy that that's the bad person or the bad guy or the bad group.
Right.
So we have to be willing to dive into the complexity.
A question from Marlene. You mentioned that the little girls are treated differently than the little boys, and I wondered if you could give some examples of what you see in that area.
In terms of how poverty impacts them?
I think so. You said there are
Yes.
differences, and I just
Yes.
wondered what the differences are.
Much of the difference is based both on economics and sometimes on culture.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, a third grade girl in elementary school will not be able to participate in after-school programs when her brother can, simply because she has domestic responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
So her job, simply because she was born female, is to help with the housework, is to take care of the children smaller than her. The other interesting piece that we've discovered is it's a matter of safety. So boys are allowed to ride their bikes and go to a soccer field or play after school, and girls aren't. Their moms walk to the elementary school, they walk them home. So and some of that is because then they go home to work, and some of it is that the girls aren't allowed to go home to walk through the neighborhood by themselves. So the other piece that's always interesting to me is when you walk on almost any playground at recess, the boys are out playing and the girls watch. And the girls, some of that creates a sedentary kind of lifestyle. But the other thing is it makes them feel that they don't have an equal voice.
You know, I live in a very affluent community, and my girls who are not shy, I have a set of 11-year-old triplets, and they are not shy about most things, and they still report to me that the boys will come and just decide they want that part of the soccer field, or they want Foursquare, or whatever.
And they give it up.
Well, my girls don't without a battle, but it's just kind of like, it's just the sense of entitlement. And that's not an economic issue, or still.
Yeah, I think where the economic part of it comes in is in neighborhoods where there's no money. Girls haven't had those kind of opportunities to go out and say, no, we're going to play soccer too, or we get to play tetherball now. We had one teacher tell us after Bossy had been at her school for a year that we needed to add an element of teaching girls sportsmanship, because now the girls were arguing with the boys over who was going to take the football and the soccer ball out, and I kind of said, go for it. You teach them, because they need to have that. And we talk about two ways of being bossy, and BOSSY means you're bossing everybody else. You're telling everybody else what to do. Bossy, spelled BAWSI, means I'm taking charge of me. I'm responsible for me. But girls begin to gain their voice then. And the power of our program with Salud por Vida, the moms program, is incredible in the whole family structure, because having mom and daughter come home feeling that they can go for a walk together, they can make choices about what food, they can make choices about gang involvement, and many of our families, many of our girls are in gang families. There is a power in just feeling like I'm taking charge of me, and I'm going to make choices for myself, those that are good for me. And when mother and daughter begin to do that together, it has the potential to impact the entire family. And Jason's wife, Tracy, is one of our Salud por Vida leaders at Landals Elementary in Mountain View, which is a very mixed population. There's very high poverty and no poverty, but I don't know how many languages spoken. So Tracy doesn't need to speak Spanish, because there are more languages than I knew existed spoken at that. But she has made an impact that will be there forever on the lives of those women.
She's really enjoying it. Definitely affected her.
Yeah.
I just had a question for the group. How do you guys think about collaboration? I mean, so not only for, take money away, so all the money you want, and you can go as deep as you want in your own program, but how would you think about collaborating to have additional impact, either at your point of intervention or handing off to other groups, after they aged out of your programs? I mean, how do you individually think about collaboration?
You mean between the three of us?
Yeah, well, no, not between the three of you, but individually. I mean, just
because
for
I
your
could
own
see.
Organization.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think. Let me answer that question in a second. But I think what we're talking about here is so similar in terms of building esteem, and part of what works in our world is bringing in a leadership component, which is the same as you're talking about, and which is the same as you're talking about. And so that chemistry that happens when you get young people engaged in activities that they've never done before is extraordinary. So, but in terms of collaborating, in our communities, each of our state groups is already collaborating with partners on the ground. Our model is to partner with community-based organizations that are already steeped deep in their communities. So the foster youth groups that we work with are also engaged in a number of other organizations and working with youth. So one of the things that I think is important as a national organization is that we engage ourselves. We don't come in and say, this is the way you have to do things. We really rely on what's happening on the ground, key stakeholders, key leaders there, and the youth to identify what the issues are. So it brings us into their world in a way that I think fosters that collaborative spirit.
I think that there's great things about collaboration. I also think at times it can be much more difficult than it might imply. And I can just speak from our own experience. One of the things at FI that we're really looking at is from an educational perspective. How do we really help set our kids up for better educational success? And as we look out at the landscape, our kids are the ones that have been kicked out of all the great nonprofits that are doing great educational tutoring programs. So trying to find, for us, developing, and it's a debate we're having and we're going to continue to have at the board level, is it our responsibility to develop that competency? If we don't see it out there in the landscape in terms of there's another organization that has the capacity to work with our clients in a way that's effective, and this isn't their population, it's a challenge. And I think that's one of the blessing and the curses when you have a niche in a population that other people aren't serving. You're doing something really important, but it makes the challenges of collaboration all that more unique. And I think, especially right now, I think on the one hand, while collaboration is an answer to some of the budget crisis, it's also a time when people are becoming very laser focused on what they do best and what they do really well. And so there isn't, the way that the nonprofit funding models are set up, you're not incentivized to experiment or do R&D during the times when you absolutely should experiment and do R&D. And so I think that that's one of the really great challenges in our sector that needs to be addressed. One of the things that we have also learned, we have done collaborations with other organizations in the past and run joint programs, is how important it is to spend a lot of upfront time making sure that your values, your mission, and your culture is really aligned in order for you to be effective and impactful. And that's something that we are very mindful of. That being said, in terms of the wider community, there are some fantastic collaboratives that are going on that I don't think a lot of people know about. I mean, for us, our relationship with the probation department is a really key collaboration that a lot of folks don't realize. When we call probation officers and say, hey, here's what's going on with this young person, here's what they need, or they will call us and say, I can't figure out what's going on with Jose, can you give me some insight? So I think looking to collaborate with quote-unquote unlikely allies often is a really important place for us to be thinking about, is where are those unlikely partnerships, might be on paper, that really can be incredibly effective and impactful. So I think it's a really interesting issue with a lot of different layers that we need to be paying attention to.
I think Bossy learned, or actually believed from day one, that we need to be a team player, that we needed to be one player on a team of people trying to impact a community, in particular of little girls. We have two very natural collaborative partners. One is the principal. We're in 21 elementary schools, and every principal, we have worked incredibly hard to build trustworthy, reciprocal relationships so that they know they can call us to speak to PTAs, to come to a parent-teacher meeting, to come to a health fair. Whatever they need, we are committed to that school community. Our other natural partner would be a collegiate women's athletic department at Stanford, Santa Clara, wherever that would be. But we have taken very seriously our role when we're at a school where City Year is, or where Playworks is, or where YMCA after school program. And we make it a point to get to know the leadership in those programs so that we're thinking alike. We don't want to compete with them. So if Playworks is there and they decide that they're going to start an after-school volleyball team for girls, then we want the Bossy girls to be part of that. Playworks, their founder and I have met, and she just says to a person, every Playworks staff who is on a campus where Bossy is says, please keep Bossy here, because when Bossy's here, we have less challenges getting girls involved. When Bossy's not here, it still is like pulling teeth because they fall into their traditional role. So we work with them and think about that. Just this week, I had a fascinating conversation with the head of Somos Mayfair in Alum Rock, who said we are going to spend next school year focusing on the entire community around Cesar Chavez Elementary School. We want Bossy to be part of the collaborative, and we're not there right now. And he said, but I want you to think of something. I want you to think about being open to letting boys in the program. I said, so Bossy girls with boys. I just said, help me understand this. And he said, the boys in Alum Rock need to see strong, powerful women in leadership. So he said, I'm not saying bring in male athletes. I'm saying have female athletes be the role models for the boys and the girls together. We left knowing that there's lots of conversation over coffee to still be had. But that's it's important to be open, and the board won't even talk about this, so don't worry. We're not ready to even kind of think, how do we do this?
Have you had little boys who said we want to come?
Yes, we have. We've had all sorts of things. We've had little boys going to principals saying, "Why can't we be bossy?" Most principals will say, well, you already are. We've had disagreements with boys who will try and disrupt what's happening with the girls, because part of the deal is one afternoon a week it's girls and women on the playground only. And I have approached numerous coaches of men's sports just saying, would you come with us? Would you form a parallel organization? It could be BAMSI, Bay Area Men's Sports Initiative. What can we do? And so far it's not taken root at all. And but here's my concern, and Lance, I love that question, because girls age out. They're in 5th grade and then they go to middle school. There is a huge vacuum for programs for girls, in particular in middle school. It's kind of the forgotten everything in terms of sports, physical activity, after school programs. And I still find myself kind of going through this grief process every spring when we do this wonderful celebration with the 5th grade Bossy girls, some who have been with us since 2nd grade, and know that they're going into this. Middle school was horrible for me. I'm not sure how my mom survived me in middle school. So I grieve about that, and I don't know if at some point does Bossy need to take that on. Do we need to build a curriculum? But we're so limited by the resource of women athletes. That is just it's our most wonderful resource and our most limiting resource.
Mm-hmm. Janet, you're now in 6 states. What are the differences you see?
There are tremendous differences. As I mentioned before, we're the founding partner, the prototype for this. It started here in California, is California Youth Connection. There's 70,000 young people in California's foster care system. We're now active in Oregon, Indiana, Virginia, Mississippi, and soon to be Nebraska. So if we just stop and think for a second where those states are around the country, there are tremendous geographic differences. So each group has a different makeup. The majority of the nation's foster care system, 468,000, are young people of color. Those statistics, though, vary greatly across those states, as you can imagine, from Oregon to Mississippi. So there are cultural differences. All of the young people, however, in those groups are pretty evenly balanced between male and female, although there are more young males now in the foster care system. So we are encountering cultural differences. We're encountering differences in the amount of services that exist on the local level. Again, each one of those states has a tremendous budget deficit. So services have already been cut for foster youth in the last few years during this difficult economic time. There is also a cultural difference around the acceptance of youth voice. One of the things that happened in California as a result of the success of California Youth Connection was the institutionalization, the expectation that young people in the foster care system would be engaged with policymakers in Sacramento and locally in 30 different counties in California. They're expected to be at the table. That doesn't exist. That cultural expectation does not exist in other states around the country. So in Mississippi, nothing like this exists at all. Young people there are saying to us, we want to make this happen because we want to be first in something instead of Mississippi always being last in something. So there is a tremendous uphill battle they have in Mississippi in being recognized and brought to the table in a meaningful kind of way. In Virginia, the differences are a lack of willingness on the part of the local Department of Social Services to really embrace the notion of bringing young people in to talk to them and listen to them in any real kind of way. So the resistance there, quite different from what we have in California, quite different from what they will have in Mississippi, but the department is resistant to even letting young people in the door. So each group has tremendous challenges in their own right of being recognized and heard. In our work, it's very important for us to build those relationships on the local level and to understand that local landscape and to help support youth step into their role, meet them where they are. Some youth have never even met other foster youth. They've never come together as a group before. They didn't realize there were other foster youth in their school, in their town. And so the idea that they can come someplace for the first time, talk about their experiences in care, and then have the opportunity to take those experiences and share them with very influential stakeholders is beyond their wildest dreams. So again, that's very different than some other places where youth have been organizing already. One young man last Monday, after they did all of their meetings with the policymakers in the Oregon Capitol, we were doing a debrief, and he said he couldn't quite get the words out, but he said, I have been waiting for this all my life. The opportunity to be with you all is what he said, and to know we have made such an impact on legislators means everything to me. So for him, it's an awakening process, and the training, the coaching, the support that we provide has to understand where he is and where his group is. That's quite different than where the California group is or the Indiana group. So there are all sorts of challenges that we're encountering to help them think strategically about how to be effective and how to organize in a sustainable kind of way. So for us, the cookie cutter approach does not work. Each training curricula that we come up with and each coaching model is a variation depending on what those differences are in every single group. But the essential thing is to understand the youth in the moment where they are and what that first step is towards leadership.
We have time for a couple more questions.
So for all three of you, obviously you're all SV2 grantees, you all have experience with scaling up. What are the biggest challenges you face in further scaling up further beyond where you are right now?
For us, the first challenge that we're really looking at right now is our funding model. So when Fly actually was an SV2, before we were SV2 grantee, which we were one of the early grantees in the early days of SV2, at that time we were 85% government funded. And what SV2 invested in for us was our first full-time development director. And so we went from a $700,000 budget to a $2.2 million budget, and now we're 40% government funded, and the rest is individual and foundation, which is great progress, huge growth. Wouldn't have happened without the investment of this organization. Moving forward, that 40% needs to go down to about 20 to 25%. And part of our assumption as to how we would scale into new communities was through government grants. And in looking at the landscape in California, that's not realistic in the next 1 to 3 years. So for us, the challenge for step number one for scaling is flipping our funding model and increasing our investment from foundations and individual donors to help us get to the place where we can do that. I think the second challenge that we face is having the funds available specifically for infrastructure needs. And there are very few foundations that are willing to pay for those crucial projects. Just to give you an example, we had a tech consultant come in and do a tech plan for us. Of our 28 computers, 26 are 3 or more years old, with most of them being 5 to 7 years old. And it's surprising how difficult it is to get the resources you need to do basic issues like that. So I think it's an interesting time in terms of that funding model. So for us, I think the infrastructure pieces are some of the crucial points. If you had asked me 3 years ago, I would have said really understanding our model and being able to train folks. That's completely changed for us because of the work we've done in the last 3 years, which really crystallizing what we do isn't magic. There's a science to it. Let's get the science out of our heads and onto paper and into training programs. And that we've done really effectively, which is exciting for me in the sense of being able to bring in new people and get them up to speed and have sustainable and repeatable impacts on kids.
So you're saying you now know how to replicate. You don't need a Christa at every site.
Right. We need to be able to invest in Christa leadership potential and their own unique attributes that they bring, whoever he or she may be. That's going to be critical for us. But we know what we're looking for. We know what we need to be successful.
I would say the same. We're at a point now where we're just passing the 2-year mark. We need to look closely at our fund development strategy and think about a change in the original model that we imagined a couple of years ago. The California organization did a national feasibility study before we spun off this separate organization, and the world has changed since that feasibility study was done. So we're at a point where we're really focusing on cultivation of individual donors around the country, looking for communities of support around the country, especially where we're launching in those 5 states, doing a joint fund development strategy with local community-based foundations in those states, which has been successful. We've gotten collaborative grants with the Indiana group as well as the Oregon group. We need to think strategically about how to market ourselves to be more attractive to national funders now that we have proof of value in these new states. So the model that we have also requires that those partners pay a fee, a membership fee, to be a part of our organization. So that plus individual donors, local foundation support, as well as national foundation support is sort of the mix that where we are at this moment. And again, needing to be very mindful that this is still seen, even despite 14 years of success in California, still seen as a startup. So needing to really take that next step and make it attractive to some of the larger national funders is something that we need to focus on in the next year.
You know, I need to keep remembering that Bossy just turned 6. And, you know, I listen to you guys and my eyes get big and my heart starts racing and I think, wow, you know, you've done so much, just amazing things. But it also reminds me that you've kind of gone 3 steps forward and maybe a couple steps back, and there's learnings that come the entire time. I have moved into this interesting realm within myself that I'm not worried about money in terms of our reach. I believe the money comes when the work is right and when the time is right to move into an area. I worry more about our model being based on the willingness of collegiate female athletes to volunteer their time. And this, a very interesting, unforeseen thing has happened in that as universities face budget issues, they are cutting back on classes offered. So the athletes are now having to take more afternoon classes than they ever have because there aren't options. So, for example, at San Jose State, we have always had women's basketball involved with us since day one. Now they don't know if they're going to get the classes they need, so it changes everything. So there's a big growing sense that we need to, in order to really expand and meet more needs of kids, we need to broaden our definition of what is a female athlete. And engage far more Tracy's of the world. Tracy's not in college anymore, but Tracy is a tremendous female athlete who has great capacity to impact lives. Anne is a tremendous female athlete who happens to turn 50 today. But Anne, played women's tennis at Cal, continues to be a competitive athlete, and has great capacity to be a great role model. So that's part of what really is mulling around, that's being forced by the fact that many of our college athletes are now either having to take classes in the afternoons when they don't have practice or having to pick up a job because they need resources. So it doesn't mean that they can't be involved. That is who we are. Without them, we don't have Bossy. But do we need to expand that definition and get more Anns and more Tracys involved in our work? And then how do you find them? Where are they? And how do we engage them in Bossy's community?
Would you be interested or open to high school female athletes?
Yeah, and in fact in Gilroy we have both Christopher and Gilroy high schools involved. The challenge there is normally the high schools get done with school later than the elementary schools, and we have to start our program right when school's out in the elementary schools, so that is a challenge as well as transportation. But they have been incredibly good in Gilroy, I have to say.
Because I was thinking for a lot of high schools, more and more kids are doing community service, and
Yes.
in an athlete's off season, that might be awesome.
And we do have Presentation High School involved every week, every single Tuesday there with the Bossy Rollers. So, and that's a good thought. And again, I think I need to just have more conversations with high school athletic directors as to how we can get through that barrier of transportation and class dismissal time.
Some of the schools also get out early one day a week. You can take
That's
the high
true.
school kids over.
Or,
It's a
I
great
don't know how
idea.
many Los Gatos High is on a block system where they get out early, late every other day. I don't know how common that is. 2 o'clock some days, half the days.
Yeah, it's a great idea. It's a great idea.
So fabulous. I love this brainstorming, and this is perfect for next steps. As we close, I just want to really encourage all of you who have been inspired or really want to connect with any of these 3 organizations to continue to share your brainstorms of when high schools get out and all these great ideas that are going to take their organizations to the next level. So obviously go to their websites, or if you have any trouble contacting anybody, of course, feel free to go through SB2. The other thing I just want to say is, as we are mingling after, so we have Christa from Fly, and we have Ethan, who's a board member from Fly. We have Janet from National Foster Youth Action Network, and we have Nancy Cannon O'Connell, who is an SB2 partner and on the board of Action Network. And then we have Marlene for Bossy, and we also have Anne, who's on Bossy's board, and Jason, who served on Bossy's board for a year as an SB2 board fellow. So you have lots of people in the room who you can ask questions to and follow up as we mingle. And thank you so much to our 3 fabulous presenters, and thanks all.
Thank you.